Welcome to the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. I'm a former brick and mortar store owner turned retail expert who is passionate about entrepreneurship and has experienced the highs and lows of running a retail business. Whether you're a seasoned retail veteran or an aspiring store owner, consider me your guide on this store owning journey. If you're looking to run a profitable and growing business that doesn't drain you, follow my 6 stages of shopkeeping and subscribe to this show. Join me for a journey of continuous learning where protecting your mind, maximizing profit, and determining your own schedule are a priority. Get ready to work smarter, profit more, and grow your retail business. Welcome to episode 234 of the Savvy Shopkeeper Retail Podcast. What's draining your store's cash flow? Identifying the root cause. I'm your host, Kathy Cruz. So we're continuing with my 3-part series about cash flow. And as a continuation to last week's conversation, one thing I often hear store owners say as the cause of problems in their business is cash flow. They say cash flow is their problem. But cash flow is a really broad concept because cash flow isn't just the income that you're generating. And I talked about that last week. It's money that flows in and out of your business. If you missed last week's episode, I am going to encourage you to go listen to it first. It's episode 233. It was titled Cash Flow Part 1, Cash Flow Uncovered, Why It's More Than Just Your Sales. So go back and listen to that one, although you could still technically listen to this and go back and listen to that one later. But if a one-on-one client came to me and said cash flow is their problem, and they use those exact words, I would immediately know that I would have to dig a lot deeper because there's so much to unpack on that topic. I've learned when retailers say cash flow is a problem, they're often referring in their minds to 2 different situations. A lack of income in general, they just aren't making enough revenue to cover everything, or cash flow crunches. They have a lot on credit card debt. They have net terms accumulating and they owe vendors, and a certain amount of money that makes them uncomfortable. Their bank accounts are low because they've invested in their busiest season or quarter of the year. That's a cash flow crunch. And yes, both a lack of income just in general and a situation where a cash flow crunch happens, yeah, for sure, those are 2 reasons why cash flow can become problems. But there are 2 other reasons that I'm going to talk about today. So I want you to consider all 4 of these reasons. If you tell yourself, or if you say it out loud, or if you've said it in Master Shopkeepers that cash flow is your problem, I want you to really kind of pause, pay attention to this episode, and figure out, well, maybe cash flow overall is a problem, but which of these 4 reasons is contributing to the cash flow problem? So let's first talk about the lack of income, since this is what I mentioned in part 1 of this series in episode 233. So lack of income. These reasons relate to not generating enough revenue, like I've said, but I want to share some particulars around this. So is it low foot traffic that's causing you to not generate enough income? So if you can't get people in your door and you can't generate sales, this is the most common and of course directly impacts cash flow. Then there's inadequate pricing. Setting prices too low to attract customers to get people to come in can result in sales that just don't generate enough income for your store so that you can cover all the costs and expenses. There's also poor product mix, where you're offering products that don't sell well or aren't in demand. That can lead to poor revenue performance. I've seen store owners open a particular type of store and dig their heels in the sand because they just refuse to change their offerings. And of course, that led to cash flow problems. The next one I have on the list is low sales volume. And for this one, I'm talking about conversion rate. So maybe you get a decent amount of foot traffic in, but it's a lack of turning that foot traffic into a sale. And this could be maybe because you have a staff of part-timers who just stand behind the cash wrap and check people out. No one in your store is actually selling. I have two more to share. There's maybe a situation where there's high competition, and I have to say that personally, I haven't witnessed this one. But I suppose in a highly competitive market, maybe a retailer could struggle to attract customers, and that could result in lower sales and income. Again, I'm going to stress that I have seen many, many examples and situations of retail businesses struggle with cash flow. This hasn't been one that I've witnessed myself. The last one, on the other hand, that I am going to share kind of makes me sad to share it, but I have to share it because I have seen this happen. And I would say, is it the owner or the brand? Like, is it just not resonating? And I will admit that this one is rare, but it does happen. So in some instances, I've seen it where it's a solo shopkeeper who's abrasive, and people come into the store and maybe their overall brand doesn't resonate. Of course, that is going to result in a cash flow problem and a lack of income. Regarding the lack of income, I want to caution you though, like be very careful with this one because what you consider low or not enough income may not be the problem. Because because remember, if I revisit the store examples that I shared about in episode 233, I've known two shopkeepers that had businesses that were open at the same time. The one was a $500,000 business, while the other generated less than $150,000. The $500,000 business struggled to make a profit for years, while the 150K business owner profited $35,000. Yes, $35,000 out of a $150,000 business. I mean, that shows you what's possible. But I want to make sure that I mention that because sometimes I see store owners say, even in the, several $100,000 mark, that they're just not generating enough revenue. But that's not the problem. Again, we would have to dig deeper, but just know that even a single six-figure business can generate profit out of the business. So just be careful not to tell yourself that low revenue is the reason for your cash flow problems. All right, number 2 is financial mismanagement. So these reasons stem from poor handling of the retailer's finances. And of course, that will lead to cash flow problems. So in this instance, could it be that you're neglecting cash flow forecasting? I won't even get into this too much because some of you are going to say, Kathy, I don't even have time to do what I do, let alone forecast in my business. But I am going to talk about some things that do make sense and that you should consider. So over borrowing, are you taking on too much debt or poorly structured loans that can lead to excessive interest payments and strain your cash flow? Do you not have an adequate reserve fund? So maybe you haven't taken the time to set aside emergency funds to handle unexpected expenses, such as repairs or seasonal dips in sales. Another thing that you might want to consider is, do you have a poor accounts receivable management system? So I've mentioned accounts receivable a couple times now. For most of you, this isn't something that you do in your retail business, but I just want to stress, especially for like the print shops, account receivable does apply. So are you failing to collect payments on time from customers and allowing too much credit? That can result in delayed cash inflows. Are you mixing personal and business finances? This is something I'm going to stress over and over again. If this is you, make this a priority over the next week or two to start separating them. I can't stress it enough. Blurring the line between personal and business expenses can make it really hard to track and manage cash flow effectively. This has to be number 1. This episode is brought to you by my new free resource, Valuable Data to Collect for Your Brick and Mortar Store. One of the questions I hear most often is, how is my business making money, but I'm not making money? I ran a profitable brick and mortar business from day one, and the reason why is because I used data to make decisions. In my new free guide, I'm sharing all the systems that I would set up and the data I would collect if I were to start a store from scratch again. Whether you're preparing to open or you've been open for years, it's never too late to start tracking. Visit savvyshopkeeper.com/data to get the guide. The last thing I'll say on financial mismanagement is, are you overspending on non-essentials? Are you spending on unnecessary upgrades? Are you spending way too much on supplies or software, excessive marketing, or other non-core activities that drain your cash reserves? All things to consider when we're talking about financial mismanagement. Now we're moving on to number 3, operational inefficiencies. These reasons relate to inefficient operations that increase costs or delay cash flow inflows. So, excessive inventory. Are you carrying too much stock that ties up cash that could be used elsewhere, especially if inventory isn't selling quickly enough? And that would be inventory turnover. Are there supply chain delays? And this we really experienced during the pandemic, but I think some retailers were afraid that this was going to happen again. So, like late deliveries from suppliers or poorly managed restocking, that can delay sales and revenue. Is there poor labor productivity happening in your business? If staff is undertrained or not productive, retailers may be paying more labor hours than necessary. So, increasing operational costs without generating enough revenue, that can happen. Do you have uncontrolled overhead costs? Are you failing to manage rent, utilities, or other fixed costs? That, of course, can result in cash flow strain. Is there frequent equipment breakdown and that you're paying to get these serviced or replacing the equipment? This could be for the embroiderers who are listening. Is there lengthy order fulfillment that's happening? So, like slow or inefficient processes for fulfilling orders, that can delay the cash collection. The last one, and I briefly touched on it, is poor inventory turnover. So, are you holding on to slow moving products instead of focusing on the high demand, fast selling items? So, when you hold on to that slow moving stuff, or you just hold on to the stuff that's stale and dead, and I've talked about this plenty of times, that definitely can cause cash flow issues. And then the last reason is number 4, cash flow crunches. So, cash flow crunches, those are temporary shortfalls, I guess we can call them, where expenses exceed available cash. For retailers, these crunches are often seasonal, especially if your income is cyclical or heavily dependent on holidays or tourist seasons. And I know at least I would say 70-80% of my audience, you all peak in Q4. And I would say maybe another 20 to 30% peak in other seasons. So it could be a shop in a big summer tourist town. It could be a florist who really peaks around Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, and then a little bit in Q4. Retailers may experience high revenue in some months and much lower revenue in others. It is just what retail is. And that, of course, can lead to short-term cash shortages. So in this case, I would ask myself, is it inventory overload? Are you buying large quantities up front to prepare for peak season demand? Of course, that is going to tie up significant cash. Are you making early payment to suppliers, especially before the holiday season? So maybe the suppliers are shipping items to you and you're paying, on a cash basis. That means as soon as it's getting delivered or as soon as it's getting shipped, you're paying for it in that moment versus being on net terms. During cash flow crunches, for sure, there's usually an increase in staffing needs. So hiring and training seasonal staff in advance of a peak season will start to drain your cash flow. Your payroll costs rise before peak season sales come in, and that adds to the financial strain. So with those 3 things I mentioned, inventory overload, early payment to suppliers, increased staffing needs, if you think about all of that, not only are your expenses and your cost of goods peaking, but there's a delayed cash inflow because you're still not serving those customers during that peak season. So that delay alone is going to make that cash flow crunch feel more intense. And then there's marketing and promotions expenses, like all the things that you pay for in preparation of a big season. I mean, I can go on and on. But if we consider all four of these reasons, like all of these issues can put a major strain on cash flow. So let's recap, because I know I just shared a lot of information and your mind might be trying to summarize it. So if I were to ask you what's the problem in your business and you immediately wanted to say, well, cash flow, Kathy, of course it's cash flow. I want you to ask yourself these three things first. Is it insufficient income, financial mismanagement, or operational inefficiencies? Those are the first three reasons I shared in this podcast episode. And if it's none of those, and what you're actually experiencing is a cash flow crunch, that is something different. Those are the short-term issues that can be improved with cash flow practices that'll help you bridge the gap between revenue fluctuations and ongoing expenses. This is the one I actually want to help you normalize, especially if there isn't a sign of a bigger problem like the first three things I mentioned: the insufficient income, the financial mismanagement, or the operational inefficiencies. A cash flow crunch is simply, and when I say simply, I'm not trying to minimize it because I understand cash flow crunches can feel really heavy, but is it just something that happens every year around Q4 and then you rebound after the holidays because you get all of that revenue in and you're able to pay everything off? And if this is the case, if it's a cash flow crunch, I want you to ask yourself, how can I regulate my nervous system and my mind around this time of year? Because this, the cash flow crunch, is actually a normal part of running my retail business. On a personal note, regarding my own journey with owning a retail store, cash flow crunches are personally something I learned to navigate and had to manage myself. Like, I didn't have any of this information that I'm sharing with you. I had no idea what was happening. Even though we were a tiny retail business, for some, you might think super low income or not enough income. However, cash flow was not a problem, and cash flow crunches were something I just had to learn how to normalize. Was it uncomfortable for me from September to November-ish, December? Yes. Hell yes, it was. But I did teach myself some tips and tricks, and we eventually got into a position where we were cash flow positive, meaning before our busiest season, we were able to fully fund our own investment in Q4 rather than relying on credit card debt or loans. That meant we were able to avoid that serious cash flow crunch feeling at the end of the year. That took a lot of work, and it's taken me this long to kind of figure out, well, what did I do so that I can teach it to all of you? And this is something that I'll talk a lot more about in our year-long cash flow clarity challenge in Master Shopkeepers in 2025. If you didn't listen to episode 233, the episode before this one, go listen again because I talked more about this particular challenge that I'll be hosting. It's a year-long event that I'm hosting in Master Shopkeepers in 2025. In my own retail business, there was always a desire for more revenue and bigger goals, but that's an entirely different topic than experiencing cash flow issues or learning how to normalize cash flow crunch time. That would be another podcast episode and a conversation. There's a difference between wanting more and experiencing financial strain. I guess that's my point. We didn't have a cash flow problem. We didn't have a problem covering necessary expenses. So I just want to make sure that I mention that because I think awareness is going to be really key here. So it's time to wrap up this episode. I'll be the first to admit that cash flow in retail, in fact, in a lot of small businesses, if you're thinking retailers stand alone here, that's not the case. It's very challenging for a lot of small businesses. Retail's peaks and valleys in both seasonal investments and seasonal sales just make this all so much harder. So I think even though a lot of small businesses experience this, I know a lot of retailers, it's harder for all of you because of those huge peaks and valleys. Telling yourself you're a failure, though, when it comes to cash flow, I just want to stress this, that's optional. You can choose to think that if you want, but when I think that way, it certainly doesn't serve me. You actually get to choose your thoughts at the end of this conversation with yourself. But first, determine the why. Awareness is really the first step here. So, master shopkeepers, for those of you that are listening, in the future, I want you to be prepared to answer, instead of saying cash flow, I want you to be prepared to answer more specifically. I want you to be prepared to answer, instead of answering with that blanket response that cash flow is the problem, I want you to kind of dig deeper, listen to this episode a second time, and really unpack what is the true reason for the cash flow problem. I want you to get really clear on the true root cause. And that was the point of this episode, was to give you the 4 reasons that could be causing the cash flow problem. So again, I can't stress it enough. I'm a slow learner. I often have to go back and listen again, read a book again, take in a lesson, a video, a lesson 2 or 3 times to really understand it. So if you need to do that, no big deal. Go ahead and listen again. But I hope I've been really clear that there are 3 reasons really that could be causing your cash flow problems, and then a 4th that's just temporary that maybe you just haven't learned how to normalize in your brain. For some reason, we go to the default of we just must be really bad with money, and that may not be the case when it comes to cash flow crunches. Okay, I think I've tried to present this in several ways to just make it a little more clear. I hope that's been helpful. And if you did find this podcast episode helpful, please share it with a retail business friend, because I think this is something that isn't talked about enough. If you want to see the show notes to this episode or find links to anything I mentioned, you'll visit my blog at savvyshopkeeper.com/episode 234. That's savvyshopkeeper.com/episode 234. Until the next episode, and the next one will be part 3 of this series, be savvy and boss up.